Welcome to Kids Matter. I'm Dr. Elisa Minkin. As a pediatrician, mom, and grandma, I understand how challenging it can be to help our kids grow into their best selves. We are so much more powerful together. Here, I will be sharing the knowledge and wisdom of a wide range of people who understand and care deeply about children. I'm hoping for your input as well because kids really do matter. They are our future. Welcome to the Kids Matter podcast. I'm super excited and super honored to have with me today Melissa Sornik. Melissa Sornik is a licensed clinician who has been championing gifted individuals and their families since 2001. She's the co-founder of Twice Exceptional Children's Advocacy, where she served as president for over 2 decades. And she's the creator of B.E.S.T, B-E.S.T clinical model, a framework designed to build the resilience and healthy relationships essential for personal and professional fulfillment. As an adjunct professor at Malloy College, a SENG, S-E-N-G, certified parent support group facilitator, and sought-after consultant for school districts, she has literally shaped how educators and clinicians approach 2E learners. From authoring groundbreaking articles and co-developing the first online 2E course for the National Association of Social Workers, to serving as the former director of admissions for a prominent gifted school in New York City, her impact on this community is unmatched. Today, she leads a powerhouse collective of teachers, clinicians, and mentors through her clinical practice and the Smart Practice Network. So I'm super, super excited to have you here. I've been waiting a long time, as you know. Thank you so much for doing this with me today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and talk to you about this. It's my favorite topic.
Yes, and it's a really important one, and I think it's not talked about enough. So I want to start, before we talk about 2E, which stands for Twice Exceptional, and define what that means, I want to just talk about what does it mean to be gifted?
Sure. Okay. So when I think about gifted, and I do presentations and talks on 2E and about gifted, I ask the audience a question. It's the same question I ask all the time. What do they think gifted is? And I typically get, although folks are becoming a little more savvy and they're doing a little more reading about it, but it's the first answer, the typical answer is academically, real academic achievers, great academic achievers or academic strength. And that can certainly be part of it. It isn't always. It really depends on level of interest. And the word that I use to define giftedness, very simply, is intensity. What is the thing that you are passionate about? Because if you are passionate about it, you will excel. If you're not necessarily. So there's that. We see a lot of gifted underachievers. So is academic success part of this? Yes, sometimes. But the general intensity, which covers not just intellectual, but the emotional pieces, how we experience, and I say we because I was identified as gifted when I was in elementary school, how we experience the world. Everything, information coming in, sensory experiences, imagination, all of these different types of things. They're just more intense than the norm. And it really creates a different way of living and experiencing the world. And that comes with some positives, and it also comes with some challenges, because if you think about giftedness and you think about how it's measured, we're talking about IQ, let's say, which to me is only one way to measure and determine whether you're gifted or not. We have the bell curve. And the whole idea of the bell curve is most of the population sits right in the bell. And then as you go out to the ends, you are hitting, that 90 something percentile. And the farther you go out, the smaller it gets. That means that there are fewer people, right? We're in the right side of that bell curve. So we've got fewer people in there, which means fewer individuals that are really experiencing things the way the general population experiences them. So right there, there's a difference. And so to me, all of these things combine. And to me, it is having that intensity and that capacity in all of those different areas. Could be one area, could be more than one area, but it's having that intense passion and motivation in those areas and how we experience the world.
A really fabulous explanation. And I would think that the more you're towards the end of the bell curve, the more different you are, and that would affect everything, right?
It really does. I mean, working with kids, what I find is, and especially when they get to middle school and high school, when perspective taking developmentally kicks in, they feel so isolated. They feel so misunderstood. They're looking around and saying, why don't they want to be friends with me? Or why don't I maybe want to be friends with them? And what's wrong with me? They really are given a group that they have to, and I know we'll likely talk about this later, but this whole notion of masking to fit in, because we all are social beings, right? And we all thrive on relationships. And it's very, very difficult when you are in the 99th percentile of something to find an age peer. It's difficult, right? So we have those differences right there. And I tell them, hang on, because as you get older, college, you'll be able to choose more of what you do and who you know. When you go out into the world, you'll choose more. You'll specialize and you'll meet those peers, but it's hard. It's really
You'll
hard
find
to
your
fit.
people, right? You're more likely to find your people once you pick the setting where there's more likely to be people like you, right?
Exactly,
Which is
exactly.
fabulous. I want to talk a little bit more, have you talk actually a little bit more
Yeah, sure.
about other characteristics. We're not even getting to 2E yet, typically seen in the gifted population. I'll start you off with asynchronous development, please, because I'm thinking
Oh,
you can't just keep skipping ahead.
okay. All right. So with asynchronous development, this creates, let me see if I can think of a good example. Oh, perfect. Okay, you have a 5-year-old, and this brings a whole bunch of stuff into the mix. 5-year-old sitting in his kindergarten class, and the teacher says, "Draw a picture of a house." Okay, in his head, he sees a Frank Lloyd Wright rendering of a house. However, his fine motor development is that of maybe a 5-year-old, maybe younger, who knows? And all he can get out of that with that crayon is a box and a triangle on top and a door if he's lucky, and this is totally unacceptable because his motor skills are not developing at the same rate as his intellectual skills, right? So it's things like that. It's being very creative and being able to create stories, but not being able to have the skill to write. It's where we see it most, though, especially because as therapists, we're dealing a lot with social emotional needs, is the intellect is so far advanced, the intellectual strengths are so far advanced, and the social emotional are running to catch up, that there's a disparity there. And what I find is you would think that if you try to explain to them, like through cognitive behavioral therapy, why this makes sense to them, well, because they have the intellect, these especially the kids, they can argue. They'll use the information that they have, and it almost it's counterproductive to to what you're trying to do. So all of their skills and all of their development are developing at different rates, and this
That's
brings it
right.
that's the asynchrony. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to go straight into 2E at this point. And I would like to do that.
Hmm.
The reason I would like to do that is because can you imagine if you had a regular asynchrony where you're maybe just you're 5 years old, you've got the IQ of a 10-year-old, but you've got the motor skills of a 5-year-old. What if you had the language skills of a 2-year-old, but the IQ of a 10-year-old?
Right. Well, we definitely see that, and we see that with our neurodivergent populations. We see that with dyslexia, right? We see kids who have their great intelligence. It just is just so there until they walk into school, and now they have to read. Or you see it with memorization. I know I can't memorize. That's one of my big challenges. I can't memorize definitions. I still can't unless it's in the context of a bigger picture. I can't plug that stuff in. And so I don't have anything to plug it into. And so what ends up happening is, yes, you get, if we're going to start talking about 2E in here now, it's not just the asynchrony, it's dealing with a real learning difference or a learning challenge or some sort of learning disability that is further compromising the intellectual ability. The issue with giftedness, and when we throw in things like perfectionism and, going back to that 5-year-old who wants that picture of that house to look like a Frank Lloyd Wright rendering, you see a kid who shuts down and can very easily be diagnosed as having oppositional defiant disorder, when really what the problem is it's perfectionism, and they cannot, and the immaturity, they cannot understand why somebody's going to make them do something, or why they actually can't do what they expect themselves to do. And so when you throw 2E in there, it just creates more asynchrony. And what they start using too is they start to compensate by using their strengths to compensate for what they can't do all day. And that's exhausting. And that creates behavior problems or challenges. So it's very complex, especially when they're younger and it's hard for them to explain what's going on with them, because I'm not so sure that they understand. I've had kids come into my office, sit down across from me, and beg me to tell them what's wrong with them. And I tell them that the only thing that is wrong with them is that they think that something's wrong with them. And we take it apart, right? We unpack everything and we start to talk about, I'm very big on focusing on strengths. And then, all right, so what do we do? And do you think you're the only one who has challenges, and just trying to normalize things for them and help them to understand themselves. It's really hard to understand yourself, especially when people are saying things to you like, "You're so smart. Why can't you do this or why can't you do that?"
Right.
And the adults sometimes don't understand, and then you get well, they're lazy. Well, they're usually not lazy. It's just
Misunderstood.
they're
They're
misunderstood.
misunderstood.
Yeah, and there's also different ways that brains work. Like if you have ADHD,
Right.
and you've got this going on and you have an assignment to do, and it's just so hard to sit down and initiate that assignment, and you say to yourself, well, I know I have to do it, but oh, this is much more preferred activity. So you know what? I'm just going to do this for 20 minutes and then I'm going to do that. In the meantime, 20 minutes, we all know, turns into self distraction with the preferred activity, to the point where the non-preferred activity becomes so overwhelming because they haven't engaged in it that that causes a problem, and that causes anxiety and frustration, and that can look like a whole bunch of different things as well. So, especially with the younger ones, I think helping them understand themselves and giving them the capacity to problem solve on their own, I think is one of the greatest gifts that we can give these kids, to figure out how to solve problems that are novel to them and how they can work with their brains. We do a lot of that in the practice with, talking about autism and how we can use our strengths and logic to solve problems. And with ADHD, what parts of the ADHD can serve us, and what are the loopholes we have to watch out for, is teaching them how to basically use their brain in a way that's going to work for them. But they have to understand themselves first, right?
That is the most important thing, and this is the all kinds of mind kind of
Hmm.
approach, right?
Sure.
That the demystification, and it's so important. I wish all kids had a guide to their own mind. Wouldn't that be amazing? Because
Yes.
all kids have strengths and weaknesses, right? Not all kids are gifted. Not all kids
Hmm.
meet the criteria for twice exceptional.
Right.
But every child, can you imagine if they had a guide to their mind from the beginning, and the parents had a guide, and it was strength based rather than deficit based?
Yes. Yes. I mean, the thing that we can't do is we can't ignore the deficit. And there's so many schools of thought. It used to be, and it may still be in some communities, or is, if we give them opportunities in their area of strength, then we don't have to really be concerned about the disability. It's not exactly true, because there are expectations. And the way I like to think about it too is that this is really important. With gifted individuals, what they're good at, they're really good at. And let me see if I could try to use an example. Who started reading at the age of 2, right? So they go in elementary school, and they can also do basic arithmetic. And they're in there and they're getting hundreds on all their tests in elementary school. And they're just getting them just because they know, right? And then they get eventually with testing and everything else, it could happen in fourth grade, it could happen in middle school, it could happen in high school. I've seen it happen to kids in there. I've gotten a call, the kid in their junior year of high school, that all of a sudden everything's fallen apart. Why? Because they've never picked up the basic foundational skills that other students have, because those other students, those more neurotypical students, needed to learn those skills. Write your spelling words 3 times each. This would be maddening to a gifted kid who knows and can build sentences and never make a spelling mistake. Now you're going to make me write my words 3 times each. Nobody's paying attention to how they're passing that spelling test. Or they get into math and then all of a sudden they don't have the basics underneath. I describe these kids as these huge skyscrapers, right? It's really tall skyscrapers. But if you get in under there and there's no foundation underneath, that building's going to topple eventually. And I've seen it rise, and it'll topple at certain times. And I'm working with high school students on how to chunk their studies and their homework to make it bearable for them to now start building those muscles and building those skills that they never developed back in elementary school, to make it palatable for them. uh, when they don't have study skills, and I certainly didn't have them, when they don't want to study and they think they have to study for an hour, I tell them, how about you pick a time, 15 minutes a day? Don't do more than that. Don't do less, but don't do more. You set a goal. And at the end of the week, rather than having done nothing, you will have completed an hour and 15 minutes of studying, just to start to build something and give them to start building those muscles, because that's what it is. I think in a lot of ways the muscles are there. They just haven't developed those muscles because they have this like built-in skill set and knowledge where they learn like this when it's in their area of strength or interest.
But they're not getting an appropriate education if they are just passing but not learning anything, right? It should be, and I know in some states it's a legal right for gifted children to get
Yes,
special education services, but not everywhere. Is it that way in New York? I'm just curious. I don't think it is.
there is no law in New
Yeah.
York for gifted. There is no, even when we're writing an IEP, there in other states there are gifted IEPs. They don't exist here.
Right. Because one
Um,
problem is, I didn't mean to interrupt you. One problem is that the parent will be told your child is not entitled to special education services because they are meeting standards.
Correct. And I would like to give a little plug here for Gifted NYS, because they're an organization, and I can give you more information about it separately. They
Yes.
are trying to work very hard at the state level to get laws on the books for gifted kids. And that would include the twice exceptional population, because there is nothing. And you would think that they would have that there it would be in New York, but
Well,
it's
no,
not.
because the basic goal is let's get kids to pass standards. If they are passing standards, there is no problem. And that is not true at all.
Right. And where I worry about it, and again is my concern, is this social emotional impact that this has on gifted kids, because of the perfectionism, because of the emotional intensity, because of the fear of failure. They shut down. They can really start to shut down. Um, and you can see all different kinds of behavioral challenges with that as well.
But on the one hand, they're not, like you said, becoming a skyscraper. They're not building the skills because they don't have to build those muscles. And also, if
Right.
they have deficits, the deficits are hidden.
That is correct. And they're hidden. There at one time, and I think it was Susan Baum who identified the 3 types of twice exceptional learner.
Mhm.
So you had the one, and the most fortunate one, who scored, in testing, did really, really well, high achieving kid, got opportunities. Their IQ scores were high enough to be placed into a district gifted program. They were excelling and they got opportunities, because gifted people need opportunities in their area of strength to hold their self-esteem, to really learn, to really apply themselves. So that student that student who is identified as gifted has been fortunate enough to get those opportunities. The next one would be somewhere in the middle. It's, oh, by the way, I have to go back. They do have disabilities or challenges. Those are the kids that, like the one that I mentioned that came to me in his junior year of high school, that had no executive functioning skills whatsoever. Um, but his grades kept him going all the way through his junior year of high school. And that's when he started to fall.
When he can no
Um,
longer effortlessly perform.
that's exactly right. And then it was everybody's like, well, what's going on?
Right.
It was, yeah. And he ended up, he was accepted to an excellent school for college, scored the highest on his SATs in his entire freshman cohort, and was the first to be he was sent home because he didn't hand in his work. So he's turned out to be quite successful. And I understand I kept in touch with his mom for a while, but these are the kinds of things we see when they're identified as gifted early on. Then you have the next. Those are the ones you're talking about, where the gift masks the challenge, and the challenge masks the gift. So they're not identified for anything. They're working so hard to compensate for their areas of challenge. They're exhausted at the end of the day. They're usually not chosen for or given gifted opportunities or opportunities in their area of strength. And they're just treading water all day long, right? Just to stay above and pass. And they're just passing. And that takes a huge toll, right? And it doesn't give them those opportunities that gifted kids desperately need to feel good about themselves and fulfill that passion that they have for their area of interest and expertise. The ones that really, really suffer, though, are the ones that don't have what we think of, especially in school, as academic strengths, right? That's not where their gifts lie. These are our musicians. These are our artists. These are our builders. These are our the ones that care about the environment. They want to save the planet. But these are not areas of grading. These are not areas to be able to measure. They're having difficulties with their academic subjects. They end up in a resource room situation or some sort of modified, and yet their intellect is there, so they're mismatched insofar as perhaps who their peers are, who they should be with, and they're not getting opportunities to demonstrate their abilities and continue to develop their abilities. And that, to me, that's probably one of the more tragic, the
I'm thinking,
identifications or lack thereof. Yeah.
yeah, I'm thinking of divergent thinkers. I actually, in my
Hmm.
previous podcast, did a whole episode on divergent thinking with someone who had studied it. You know, often with artistic, musical gifts, but also the way they think. They don't fill out those questionnaires the same way. They don't get those scores, but they're brilliant.
Well, there's something you just brought up, something very interesting too. Somebody once said to me that gifted kids should not be given multiple choice questions. It just triggered a memory in my head. And this is where it gets tricky too. And this is understanding gifted. We make assumptions about things, especially when we're putting tests together. And we might think that an answer is logical, and I'll give you an example because I love to use examples of situations and cases that I've known about or work with. And actually, it was a friend of mine, and her son was in elementary school, and he was doing his homework, and he came home. He was learning fractions, and he had a huge meltdown at the table trying to get his math homework done. And she said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Well, the question says." Johnny's mom made popcorn. Does Johnny want a cup of popcorn? Does he want three-quarters of a cup of popcorn? Does he want a quarter of a cup or two-thirds of a cup? Of course, they're going for, the bigger answer. He said, I can't answer that question. And his mother said,
I
well,
took it
why?
literally.
No, he said, what if Johnny doesn't like popcorn? He said, and I don't have enough information He was
He was
9 years
overthinking
old.
the question.
But if you think about it, he was absolutely right. The
Right, correct.
question, if you don't know if Johnny likes popcorn, how can you answer that question?
But
Can't.
see, that's still convergent versus divergent thinking,
Yeah. I
right? We
mean,
punish the divergent thinkers rather than reward them.
right, exactly. And what we want, is we want, I think we want critical thinkers. And I often have said, I think I wrote a paper when I was in school, and I said that what we call oppositional defiance in the lower grades, we call critical thinking in college. So I don't know. It's just understanding the way these kids think. And if they give you an answer or they say something, ask them why. What are you thinking about? But I guess we don't have time to do that in the classroom, or I don't know why, or we can't think outside the box. And, I'm not saying either that this is an easy population for teachers to work with. I think that it goes beyond the classroom. I think that training needs to be done for these teachers. I worked as you know, at a 2E school, and these teachers were tired at the end of the day. And they had smaller classes and they had some support, but they were really tired at the end of the
It's
day.
kids.
Yeah, these kids are a lot. They're intense, and there
Yeah.
you have it. There's the intensity. Yeah.
So let's talk more about twice exceptional. What I'm
Sure.
wondering is what percent would you say of the gifted population is twice exceptional?
I used to know this, but I don't know it now. It's really hard to tell because so many of them are unidentified. I don't want to make a guess. So I
I
think
mean, an
that
exact number. I would say though that it's common. It's actually more common than people think, I would
possibly,
suspect.
possibly, I think the more we try to put them in a box
Mhm.
and normalize and standardize things, the more of them we're going to see, if that makes sense, because they
Well,
can't get over anymore, or they can't use certain strategies. Like, for instance, I know when I was in school, it didn't make a difference. Nobody was checking my homework. Nobody was checking my notebook to see if everything was organized in sections, which even today is there. My stuff is probably not or all that well organized in sections. Um, so I think the more we standardize things and make things rules about things and how they have to get done, the more of these kids we're going to see. And so that's why it's
then
also very hard to estimate who is and who's not. You really need somebody who understands this population to take a look and say, that kid is twice exceptional, and be able to tell you why.
right, because I can
So,
see how easily the neurodevelopmental disorder diagnosis, I'm not going to call it
mhm.
neurodivergence because, as we spoke before we started, that giftedness is a form of neurodivergence,
Yes, that is. That
right?
is.
It's
Yeah.
not separate.
No.
So you're already different, and you could be very different if you're more at the end of the bell curve on anything. Characteristics of gifted kids overlap with characteristics of these neurodevelopmental disorders, such as autism or ADHD, or differences.
Right.
We can get all politically correct about how we, talk about this. I do like the neurodiversity, difference lens
Hmm.
as opposed to a deficit lens, but deficit can come, by the way, from an inequity between the environment and the child. In other words, we're
Absolutely.
demanding this child to sit there and learn things he knew 5 years ago, and now he
Hmm.
seems to be distractible, inattentive, and hyperactive, and then he gets a label slapped on him and a stimulant.
Well, that's it. And there's also, and we can also go the other way. We have to be so careful because there are kids that we've worked with who, because of that, the to me, the pendulum either swings left or it swings right, and we've got to get it to swing more in the middle, because there are kids that are suffering with ADHD and struggling so much. And with a stimulant, they can they can be doing so much better. So we have to just be careful, because if it truly is ADHD, I believe that it needs to be treated. It's not
Sure.
fair. It's just not fair. But you have to make sure that you've got that diagnosis right.
Because if
Because
you don't look at that
yeah,
child closely, I'm sorry, but you wouldn't know the
yeah,
difference without looking at the child closely, whether that child was profoundly gifted and bored
right,
versus also has ADHD at any level of giftedness.
right. Now you can see the ADHD across different environments to sort of tease out, is this gifted or is this ADHD? And sometimes, and you can have gifted individuals who do have ADHD, but if it's not across all environments, if it's not cutting across all environments, you got to look at it again. But if it is, and you're seeing impulsivity across all environments, chances are it is. But I'm not. Again, I look at as far as I'm concerned, you see one gifted individual, you see one gifted individual, you see one 2E individual, you see one. I don't like making boxes. And the other thing that I think is important to talk about with regard to 2E is that 2E was is not a diagnosis. I'll get calls from parents say my child was just diagnosed with 2E. I say no, your child was not diagnosed with 2E. All 2E is a concept to describe a child who has very, very high intellectual abilities, or these, very, very, I hate using the word superior because we have to be, politically correct in the way we talk, but there's huge capacity for achievement in certain areas, right? And so it could be all different areas, as we've discussed. And so, whatever it is, that's one exceptionality. The gift is one exceptionality. That gift is being challenged by one area of deficit, disorder, disability, whatever you want to call it. But those are all different. And so that's the second exceptionality. It's when the two of them come together, something happens. And I can tell you that even though I will describe something and have so many parents tell me, I can't believe you're describing my child. You haven't even met them. Every kid is different. Every individual is different. Not one is exactly the same. And so I'm very careful about the boxes, but I think it's important for people to understand what 2E really means. It was only developed as a concept. There is a very good definition for it that there was a group that worked very hard to come up with a definition. It can be found online. And I also think that it was Sue Baum's group, be found on the Bridges website, the actual definition that was put on the books for 2E. But it's really important to remember, and easy to remember, that it's just two exceptionalities and what happens when they come together, if that's helpful.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I want to explain to parents who are listening to this, they might think, well, I love the idea of my kid getting gifted, but I don't want a label. I don't want a negative label. I don't want a pathologizing label.
Mhm.
Why would I need to get both?
Well, because your child is a whole person, and what the benefit I've had in working the way I work is that I work with a lot of adults in the practice. Some of them have grown up with me in the practice, and we've gotten to, some of them who were never identified when they were younger are dealing with the issues they never dealt with earlier about the struggles that they had that went untreated, unnoticed, unaddressed, the things that they tried to hide, the differences that they felt were never dealt with at a younger age. And
And
so, now they're adults and they're like, what's wrong with me?
to understand yourself alone, I think is
Yeah.
really huge. As a pediatrician, I'm very passionate about
Hmm.
picking up the girls that are missed for ADHD and autism because girls get
Yeah.
missed more than boys. Talk about masking, they tend to be better at
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And the anxiety and the depression and all the comorbidities, the eating disorders, so many problems that they have.
Hmm.
And I come in there and I help them get the diagnosis, and it turns their lives around to understand that.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think the self understanding, but also for services. And I like to say labels are for cereal boxes and services.
Right. Well, they need a special kind, they need to, if you put it, most of the time, putting a gifted kid or 2E kid in resource room is such a waste of time for them because you have to make sure that is it that they don't know the material, or it's they need a different approach to mastering the material. So everything that we've designed, everything that we do, we don't it you need to have that little extra for the 2E kids, but there's no mandate for that. And that takes us back to the fact that there's no mandate for gifted education. right,
There's
where
no
we are.
mandate for gifted education, but there is a mandate for a free appropriate
Yes,
public education at district
it's true.
dispense, and the child can either get a 504 plan for accommodations and modifications if they do not meet the criteria for an individualized educational plan, which means one of these X disabilities.
Hmm.
So if they get that label, they can get the IEP or the 504. Okay. That's their gateway, maybe not the gifted. In some states it is,
Right.
right?
They can get it, but will what they need be administered, properly identified and administered in the way that they need it to be?
That's what I want to hear from you. I want to hear more about that, please.
That's
Tell me how to
that.
make it happen,
I
please.
believe me. I wish I could. I really wish I could. Some of the things that we do in the practice is we go in and into the districts. We're not legal advocates, but we can do educational advocacy. I actually have somebody in the practice who has gotten is certified in rights law, and he has a dual master's in social work and in education. And so he'll go in and he will talk to the team, and he'll go in for other clients of the practice, and he'll go to meetings and things like that. We'll all go to meetings. We'll talk to the school psychologists, we'll talk to resource room teachers, we'll talk to the teachers, give them strategies about how to work with these kids, how to help them with their challenges like that. And, more specific to this population. You really have to find the people who work with and understand these kids. And
Love that. And
yeah.
I just want to go into just for a minute of what are the options for a gifted child's twice exceptional or no in terms of their education. So
So
one
yeah, go
would
ahead.
be, I mean, I could say one would be mainstream education with, supplemental instruction, right?
Hmm.
The pull out or push in
Right.
individualized curriculum,
Hmm.
correct?
Hmm.
Another one might be placement in a separate class,
Hmm.
right? And then there's always summer school and outside. So I wanted to hear more how that applies to the 2E kids, because what I'm
Well,
thinking is that not
mhm.
every kid can fit into every standard school. Like that's your school district, that's what they're offering. But what if it doesn't work for your kid? Then what?
Well, I will tell you that as far as placement in a separate grouping is difficult because I worry about the fact that they might not have gifted peers in that cohort, and that's a huge problem. And I
It
will
have to be
share
appropriate, right? I'm thinking about an appropriate separate placement.
if it exists. Yeah, that would be wonderful if they had a cohort like that. I don't know that. I know that I say the district that we're in Seacliff, where our office is in Seacliff, that um, school district, I don't know where they are with the program right now, but I think it was more of an enrichment program, was offering something for 2E, but I somehow think that it was more of an offering of enrichment, and I don't know what they were doing to support the challenges of those kids. It's very tricky. It's just addressing the challenges in a different way. And, there are programs that were developed. Lois Baldwin, who was the first teacher and the director for the BOCES Southern Westchester 2E program that I don't even know if it exists anymore, but she designed and developed that program. She's a consultant and she consults with school districts. And we have tried to submit proposals and have been actually asked to do training, right? And so we've done this whole training that would involve getting representatives from different schools within the district to come for these trainings and learn how to do this. And at the end of the day, after we submitted the proposal, the answer we got back was, well, can't you just do this in one PD session?
My
No.
God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm also thinking about differentiated instruction, but then again, we're taking teachers who have so many kids with
Hmm.
various disability diagnoses without the giftedness. And
Right.
here's the gifted kid who's meeting standards.
Yeah, that's right.
It's
And so they're
asking
not
a
going to be.
lot.
It is asking a lot. Now, I think very highly of Lois, and Lois has done she is, the master here in New York, as far as I know, the expert in New York State insofar as teaching how to teach 2E kids, even in a mainstream classroom. Because in that context, I can tell you none of us is really pushing for to move these kids out into a private school setting. I would much rather see a kid stay in the public school and be supported in the public school than
And
be
that's
pulling them out.
right, and that's actually their right to be in the least restrictive environment. We're
Exactly,
trying to
exactly.
mainstream all kids. We're trying to fit all kids in. It's a bigger ask the more divergent the kid is.
Correct. Correct. But there are ways of teaching these kids in a mainstream classroom and providing the supports that they need. And again, that is a program that Lois has created. That's how she works in schools. And actually, when Twice Exceptional Children's Advocacy when we were still running our conferences prior to the pandemic, Lois would do seminars, and we had teachers coming from districts to do the seminar with her. But it requires it's not just a one session
And it's
fix.
done now.
I mean, even when you take a
Hmm.
class, right? You don't take a it's a when you're going for your teaching degrees, you have a course of study where you're studying over a course of several years and, several days a week. You can't teach this in one professional development session.
You really, really can't.
No, you can't.
I want to go back a minute to the neurodiversity lens
Sure.
because I think it's really important to underscore that when you're talking to your child and they have, say, an autism diagnosis, and maybe they needed that label for services, but how do you explain it to them? Again, you can explain it in a way that empowers them, not as a deficit, right? But as
Right.
a different kind of wiring.
Yes. So when I'm talking to kids who are autistic, one of the things that I think is one of their greatest strengths, I think of their autism as a protective factor, is they have logic going for them. And if you them and stay away from the emotional pieces and you make it clear, they can problem solve very logically. And I can't remember the exact circumstances, but somebody was I don't know, one of the therapists was trying to get this child to do their homework, and they had brought up every single thing about, I can't even remember, but it was about losing video games was brought up at home and this and that and all the reasons why. And what the therapist did might have actually been a school social worker was described it in a way that made sense and was logical and said, well, let's think about this. This is the outcome you want, right? This is where you are now. Can we logically problem solve this and figure out what you have to do? They can really do great problem solving if they use the parts of their autism that allow them to do that. So if we don't confuse them and we're straightforward with them and say, here's the problem, here's where you are. Can you really do C, get from A to C without doing B? And, let's figure out why. And they're great at solving the problem that way. They operate all the time, I believe, when they're regulated, by the way, through a place of logic. And my older clients who are in college, I've one particular in college who said that that's what they like about the work that we do in the practice because we actually help them to use and implement the autism to work with their challenges.
I love that so much because, again, it's a strength based. I think we're stuck
Mhm.
with pathologizing and deficit based approaches. Yes, you have to acknowledge the deficit. You have to deal
Yeah,
with it. For a kid with ADHD, it may be, executive function help in addition to a stimulant or whatever it is. We're not saying those aren't needed,
right.
but to look
Exactly.
at it from a strength base and to empower the kid rather than making them feel that they're broken because they're not
Right. I think
broken.
a lot of the time what with the best of intentions when we identify now we're identifying kids, neurodivergence has become the buzzword, right?
Right.
And sometimes I think, oh boy, now we're going to say, okay, you're neurodivergent. How are we going to take your neurodivergence and change it? Right? And I hate the word fix, but I'm going to use it anyway and fix it so that it doesn't bother you anymore, you know? All I want to know is, Are we really respecting that neurodivergent piece and figuring out how it can be applied for that person? Or are we just trying to say, okay, now we know you're neurodivergent. Now we can identify where you're not like everybody else. And can we try to help you to be more? And I'm not making any accusations. That's just what, I kind of get concerned about in my own head, that I don't want that to happen.
Right. Are you saying that people are looking at it like, okay, my child has a neurodivergent diagnosis and now I'm going to fix it and make it go away?
I don't know. I don't think so. I would hope not. I just want to make sure that we're looking at the neurodivergence. And when we say that we're celebrating neurodivergence, that
Right.
we really are, is what I'm
Right.
saying.
We need to
Not,
walk the walk, not just
yeah,
talk the
not walk
talk.
around or not try to go around it. Use it.
Work with it. See, it goes back to again the same thing of all kinds of minds and demystifying and empowering. We
Hmm.
have to get that mindset. And it's very unfortunate that I think we're stuck in the medical pathologizing mindset.
Yeah, we have
It's
been for a
really
very
a
long time.
problem.
Hmm.
We are polarized about this. Either there is a deficit or there isn't, but that doesn't mean that you can't look at that deficit from a larger whole child perspective.
Right. Right. I
It's
mean, I had the pleasure of working with, I have had the pleasure of working with some really amazing kids and adults. But one that came to me, dyslexic, when he was in 5th grade, it's a really interesting case. He was living in Connecticut, and I think it was in kindergarten where he realized he couldn't read and was embarrassed because all the other kids were reading. And I think what happened was he said to his mother, I don't want to go to school. I just want to stay home. And by the way, I'm not recommending this for everybody. Again, this is one kid, 1, 2 kid. That's, the situation. She let him stay home. And he figured out, oh, this is very interesting too. He played video games probably, I think, for a few weeks until he realized, and this is what I love about the dyslexic mind, that they were becoming boring because that he'd recognized the patterns over and over again in every game and said, this is there's nothing here, that I want to do. One way or another, he taught himself how to read. I'm not exactly sure how he did that. And where I connected with him was right around 4th grade or so. He decided that he wanted to go to school. So they moved to Long Island, and I started working with him. And he went to school, and I advocated for him all the way through until I couldn't anymore. There were issues of him handing work in on time, about him getting writing assignments done. He did not want accommodations, specific accommodations for his dyslexia. He didn't want to use speech to text. He definitely wanted to do his own writing. But a lot of the times he was late with assignments, or he didn't hand in what the teacher's expectations were. And every year we would have the same meeting. Well, we don't know if he should be in honors next year because the level of the work and how much he has to produce is going to be too much for him. And I said, if you put him in a mainstream class that is not honors, he will not learn. In fact, he'll probably go to sleep. And to this district's credit, I don't know how we managed this, but I think we managed it through maybe the first year of high school, all the way through middle school, keeping him in honors with the amount of work that he was doing. And then I think when he surpassed the comp sci teacher's knowledge of of what what he had and what his capabilities were, him out. We moved him into a one-on-one program where he could continue to learn, and he wasn't being penalized for what he couldn't hand in. And this was a kid who was like building rockets at home, doing all kinds of unbelievable things. He did graduate from high school, and his dream school was MIT. People say, "How's he going to go to MIT? How's he going to get accepted?" I don't even remember what his grades were. It doesn't matter. He applied to, I remember there were 3 applications that stick out in my mind. One was MIT, one was RIT, and one was his safe school, which was Stony Brook. I do believe he was rejected by Stony Brook, which is interesting to me, and I kind of understand it. He was waitlisted at MIT, which to me was such a major accomplishment for a kid with such profound dyslexia, and he was accepted to RIT. So it's all how you work with a kid. It's all how the school is willing to work with the kid and knowing that kid and how they learn.
We were so fortunate to have you as an advocate, and I just want to put in a plug for advocacy here that
Thank you.
as the parent, you have to do this, but find if you can find anybody, if you can afford not unfortunately, there's an equity issue here, right, where people
Yeah,
can't necessarily afford it, but
sure.
I've seen some phenomenal parents of low income who are phenomenal advocates, and you gotta pull up that inner mama bear. You have
You
to.
do. You do. I did it for my son when he was in school. I went to so many meetings.
Right.
Um,
So,
yeah.
and there are some certain advocacy services that are available, but like
Mhm.
pull out all the advocacy you can because
Yes.
I can see that the resources are dwarfed by the need. The need is much greater
The other
than what's
thing
out
is,
there.
yeah, and the other thing is find the community. You need the community. I think that's very important. The pandemic really hit people very hard, I think, in coming together. We used to do parent meetups. We had a lot of that going on, and it really, some nights we'd have 20 parents show up just to talk and just to laugh with each other because, that it's like, it's really hard because the other thing is you have a gifted kid. A lot of times you have gifted parents because giftedness, there's an inherited component to it. And it's very hard to be a gifted parent and have a gifted kid, and it almost brings up all of your own stuff, right? When you're going through this, and it can be very lonely. It's a very lonely walk to walk by yourself. I mean, the reason that I got into this in the first place was because when my son was classified and he had an IEP, there was a gifted group at his school, gifted parent group, and there was also SEPTA, right? And I didn't fit into either one of them. I mean, I would go to the gifted group and I was the mom whose kid had challenges, even though his IQ was off the charts and he was, incredibly intelligent. And then I'd go to SEPTA and they'd be like, "Well, what are you complaining about? You you have a gifted kid." So I couldn't find the balance and I couldn't find my peers. So that's when I started Twice Exceptional Children's Advocacy because I needed other parents to talk to. Nobody else got this. And I think that community is super, super important. So, and it's also to help you find resources.
Right. I'm also going to point out this is not specifically for 2E, but
Yeah.
there is an organization called All Brains Belong Vermont,
Oh,
started by physician Mel Hauser, that is meant to help kids find their people who are on the autism spectrum.
hmm,
I don't know if you even have to be on the autism spectrum, but it might be a resource for 2E kids for the same
it's
reason that they
great.
try to match up kids with same interests. And there's programs like the Johns Hopkins,
Hmm,
Center for Talented Youth,
hmm.
where, you're not going to be excluded because you're twice exceptional.
No, I know several kids who are twice exceptional, who are involved with Johns Hopkins.
So I think, part of advocacy may be also finding things to do outside of school if you can't fix the school,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Need to do that. And there are programs at some of the colleges that run again, I believe in being really upfront about what your child's strengths are and what their challenges are when you're approaching these programs. Keeping it under wraps doesn't do anybody any favors. But there are some really excellent programs. And then there are some other things like through the practice, we run Dungeons and Dragons. We've been running that for like
Classic.
10 years. It's fantastic. They love it. And the thing about it is, a lot of them will say they love being in our building and in our offices because they feel understood. And I think that also speaks to the practice. I know that a lot of the kids that we work with have said, "Oh, we come here and we feel like somebody finally gets us." And when they're grouped in Dungeons and Dragons, they're all different, and they'll annoy each other, but they feel accepted and they always come back and they always want to be there. And we also run what we call Collaborative Creativity Lab on Saturdays for elementary school kids, which also is it's social learning through project-based activities. So it's finding things like that. I started all of this as a parent, building it myself. Truly, that's how a lot of the programs You can join with other parents and you can start a weekend chemistry lab group by yourself. You don't necessarily need, you need to find the other parents. I really believe that the community is
How?
super important.
How? Because that's what's percolating in my brain right now. Kids deserve their people. They shouldn't have to wait till college. How do you help them find their
No.
people?
Yeah, and that's it. That is super hard. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do now is, and I don't want this to be a therapy group, I would love to form a Socratic discussion group for high schoolers and maybe even younger college students, to talk about really interesting things that these kids and young adults can't find peers to talk about. They're just not interested. So forming a group that could be facilitated, but again, not a therapeutic group, just hey, I want to talk to somebody about this aspect of the world, or this is what's been, with my existentialism, this is what I want to talk about. And can I get four other young people in a room to talk to me about that and come up with the essential questions and answer those essential questions?
Right.
So
I'm going
things
to
like
ask
that.
you, yeah, I'm going to ask you to give me whatever resources I can put at the end for parents to be able to get started on that search because that's a quest, right?
It is a quest. It is a quest. And there's a really great group in New York City. And I really wish that there would be a group of parents on Long Island that would pick it up. It's a 2ENYC, and it's an online group. And there should be one on Long Island, because this is parents networking with each other online who have found programs and services and all of that, and they're getting their resources through that group, about schools, about summer programs, about therapists, and all kinds of things. And I think that building that, and I won't build it, but I'd be happy to help build it, or consult with a group of parents to do it if they're interested, because I think that parents talking to parents has so much value. So
And that's part of your advocacy, right? So it gives you an
mhm,
avenue to do go through that quest.
exactly.
So I really like this. I really love everything we talked about. I just want to have you say one more thing because we didn't talk about best, and I think people are going to be
Oh,
scratching.
sure.
What is saying before we forget? What is SENG?
Oh, social emotional needs of the gifted. It's an
Okay.
organization, and they had a program for working with, and when I was a group facilitator, very specific. And there's a book, actually. I can give you the name of it at the end. I keep it and I recommend it to parents, about how to parent gifted children. And it's a great book. It was written by one of the founders who passed away a few years ago. But it's a really great book, and that's what Sing is. They're still in existence, I believe. Um,
We might have to do
s-
part two because we really didn't even talk about that. There's like so much more to talk about. We just kind of scratched the surface.
there is a
And the
lot
whole
to talk
concept of
about.
parenting a gifted child,
Oh,
we didn't get to. We really talked more about
right.
why identify what is it, than how to do it.
Exactly. So very quickly, as far as BEST is concerned, it's a model that I've been using in the practice for years, and I needed to define it. And it's really about relationship building. And I think that, so what BEST stands for, the B stands for boundaries. And it's really important to, and I'll talk about the parent child relationship here, but really it pertains to everything when you're talking to teachers, even in the workplace, right? You need to know where you end and that other person starts. And it's very important to hold certain boundaries, and that we're not constantly stepping on each other's toes. And so to come up with not necessarily a rule base, but how to set limits, how to set guidelines, and how to work those things out. Right. So that's the B in BEST, is how to set healthy boundaries with yourself and your child. The next one is effective communication. Now, obviously, everybody communicates, but effective communication is a little bit different. And it really depends on how the other person is perceiving what you're saying, and making sure that the other person is perceiving what you're saying. Um, it involves active listening, getting your point across in a way that, the other person understands, checking for understanding, really making an impact, and making sure that everybody has an understanding of what the communication is about. And there's an art to it. Certainly. I think, I catch myself sometimes. I say, wow, I really could have said that better, or I really could have explained that better. Right. So it's something I think we always have to work on. The S stands for see the person in front of you. And what does that mean? Especially when we're dealing with our children, when you find out you've got a gifted kid, got a million you see your kid building Legos and you decide they're going to be an architect. Then they're playing with dinosaurs and they're going to be a paleontologist, right? We have to really see our kids and who they are and what they want, and make sure that what we want for them is what they want for themselves, and is going to match them, not necessarily what we want. It goes beyond that. It goes to what are their needs in the moment as opposed to our needs in the moment. And it's good for the kids to be able to see us too and who we are. Yes, I am parent, but it doesn't mean that sometimes I'm having a hard day and I may need to say to you, yes, even though I'm your parent, right now, uh, I can't answer that question, or I might not think about it the way you're thinking about it. And just recognizing each other as individuals, right? So that's what I mean by seeing the person in front of you and making sure that you have a good understanding of who they are and where they're coming from. And that can constantly be changing. The last one is taking a break. That's what the T is for. And that is, I hate arguments, and they're not productive. And I explain to kids, it's like you've got a big battery, and it's not about winning and losing. It's every time you keep engaging in an argument, especially one that's going nowhere, you are actually giving up your power, and you have more power walking away. I also don't think that arguments are healthy. They can become toxic. And so recognizing when something is getting heated and giving the child or the parent or whoever it is permission to back up. Let's table this for a while. Let's take a break and we can come back to it later. And I really believe that if we use these four things, these four different categories of working in relationship, that will build better relationships. And I really believe in relationships. I think we're social beings. We need to know how to get along with other people and get our needs met without stepping on somebody else's toes, and really all try to work together to get what we need.
It's phenomenal, and it's of course applicable to everybody.
Yeah, I think
However, I,
so.
I see, I see, just to bring it back to the twice exceptional / gifted kids, I see how their intensity as their predominant, way of being is so much more needed for these pieces.
Yes, yes, it is. And the other thing I might want to add is, even, for parents and teachers, when these kids they are so intense, try not to take them personally. And when you see the asynchronous development and you've got a 12-year-old who is yelling and screaming and throwing something, chances are in that moment they're not 12. Their intellect may be at a 16-year-old's level, but in that moment may be functioning like a 5-year-old. So close your eyes, imagine that they're a 5-year-old, and just say, I'm going to back up from this. I'm not going to fight with this, because there's your asynchrony again too.
Right. And see the whole child,
Exactly.
not who you want the child to be.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So I want to thank you so much. I hope we can come back for part 2, because I think we just
Sure.
scratched the surface at the
Okay.
end.
It would be my pleasure to do that. This was
And I apologize
great.
to you. I'm sorry. I apologize to you and everybody else who couldn't see me for almost the entire video, if you're watching on video.
Okay.
So thank you so much.
Okay, this was great. This was really lovely. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure and
Okay.
honor. Thank you for listening to Kids Matter. Raising healthy, happy children takes a village, and I'm grateful you're part of ours. If today's conversation resonated with you, please share this episode with another parent, grandparent, teacher, or anyone who cares about kids. Together, we can build the supportive community our children deserve. I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future topics at kidsmatterpodcast@gmail.com with no exclamation point. Your voice truly matters. Until next time, keep advocating for the children in your life, because kids really do matter. They are our future. I'm Dr. Elisa Minkin, and this has been Kids Matter. Please note that while I am a pediatrician, I am not your child's pediatrician. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. For any medical concerns or decisions, please reach out to your child's healthcare professional.